After Hood, we would return to the Galapagos Explorer for lunch, while the ship headed west to the next location, the island of Floriana. Floriana is an old volcanic island with verdant highlands and some barren lowlands, and a small population of farmers. The island has a sordid history that includes cannibalism of slaves, plus an eccentric baroness with 3 lovers feuding with 2 conservative German families that resulted in theft, murder, and intrigue. Before hiking on the island, we would take one of the large lifeboats, called a pangon, to an eroded and submerged volcano called Devil's Crown, for those passengers interested in snorkeling. Various seabirds nest in the rocks, and numerous fish and sea lions swim in the waters. On rare occasions we spotted white-tipped reef sharks and hammerhead sharks, but I always saw schools of yellowtail surgeonfish. There's also a short tunnel that cuts under the formation that one can swim through. Then we'd head to Punta Cormoran. The landing beach has a greenish tinge from volcanic olivine crystals mixed into the sand. Here I described the kind of volcanism found in the Galapagos.
And it's not the kind that generally builds up a lot of pressure and then explodes. That kind of volcanism is more associated with faults. And the volcanism we get here is not like Pompeii or Mount St. Helens or Krakatoa, where we have this hot stuff that just burns through the surface and bubbles out, and it forms a nice dome-shaped volcano.
The weather on the Galapagos Islands is strange, in that during the rainy season the weather is mostly clear and warm, and although it rains only occasionally, it rains fairly hard. Whereas during the dry season the weather is mostly cloudy and cool, and drizzles frequently, although the drizzle doesn't penetrate the soil. Here I talk about that drizzly dry season rain.
It's close to the ocean, so it's humid air, and it does form clouds. But it's low, and remember that warm layer up above? The cool, moist air can't get above that warm air, because cool air sinks, hot air rises. So clouds will form, and they spread out in a stratus cloud formation over the entire Pacific, but it doesn't rain. And this cloud mass keeps going along until it runs into something like the Galapagos Islands. Now there's heat rising from the islands, there's the shape of the islands, which will push the winds right up, and they will shove this cloud layer, you see all around here, they'll shove it up just slightly, enough to get a little bit of water out of it, and you get a little drizzle like we felt this morning. They call it garua. It's just a little drizzle, it doesn't do much, and it doesn't penetrate the sand, or the ground. After a long drizzle, you can scratch your toe through the ground, and it's dry, bone dry right underneath.
We'd then hike past a salty lagoon, shown here with some marine iguanas and a great blue heron. Often we'd see some of the small population of flamingos that populate the islands. After a short hike to the opposite side of the island, we'd come to Flower Beach with its extremely fine powder-like sand. Often we'd see stingrays close to the shore here. Then we'd return to the ship. That night the Galapagos Explorer would head north to Academy Bay and the town of Puerto Ayora on the island of Santa Cruz. There we would send those passengers staying for the full week up to the highlands by bus. The 20-minute trip took us from cactus-filled desert to fog-drenched rainforest. There we would view Los Gemelos, which are 2 huge, deep volcanic depressions. Occasionally we'd catch sight of a vermilion flycatcher. Here's the bright red male and yellowish female. And then we'd often visit some of the lava tunnels, which formed from flows of lava that cooled and solidified on all sides, and then drained out to form long, snaking tubes. Some, like this one, are long enough to walk through for long distances. Meanwhile, the passengers only staying for half a week would visit the Charles Darwin Research Station, which I'll describe later. Afterward, we would release the passengers to visit Puerto Ayora and do some shopping before returning to the ship. In the afternoon, the Galapagos Explorer would head out to nearby South Plaza Island. We would take those passengers interested in snorkeling into the narrow channel between North and South Plaza, where we would have the opportunity to view a variety of fish and swim with the curious and playful sea lions. Then we would head to the small, flat island of South Plaza for a guided tour. South Plaza is an upthrust, rocky island known for its land iguana population. These iguanas also descended from the mainland green iguana, but in the Galapagos they evolved to survive mostly on prickly pear cactus. They have very tough mouths. They have a much lighter coloration than marine iguanas since they don't cool off in the water and need to avoid overheating instead. Life can be hard for land iguanas during dry periods, and they sometimes die of starvation. In response to predation by land iguanas and tortoises, the prickly pear cactus on some of the Galapagos Islands has evolved into what is essentially a tree. South Plaza is also covered with a low-lying succulent red sesuvium plant. The trail leads up to a cliff where swallow-tailed gulls nest. This beautiful black, gray, and white bird has red feet and a crimson eye ring, and it's endemic to the Galapagos Islands. Here is a swallow-tailed gull and its chick. And here is a mating pair of swallow-tailed gulls. Sometimes we'd also see the endemic lava gull, the rarest gull in the world, nesting on South Plaza. The island is home to the usual sea lions. Here I am with a small pup. There is also a bachelor colony of males that are either too young or too old to establish their own harems. The bulls often fight to establish dominance, as shown here. Rarely we'd spot a manta ray swimming off the coast of South Plaza. That night the Galapagos explorer would return to Puerto Bacarizo Moreno, where the next day we would see some of the passengers off and pick up others. The plane arrived earlier on this day of the weekly schedule, so we had more time in the afternoon. Again, we would split the passengers into groups, and I would usually give the new passenger orientation. The second leg of the weekly schedule also started with a trip to Kicker Rock and another panga ride around it. Afterward, we would make landfall on nearby Cerro Brujo Beach for some swimming and light bird watching. It was the one day a week I was able to get in a long run instead of exercising in the cramped quarters of the ship. But overall, the times we spent in San Cristobal were not the most interesting part of the journey. They were more about making the best of a necessary trip to the airport. That night, the Galapagos explorer would sail north to the small cinder cone-covered island of Bartolomé. The next morning, we would first climb to the island's high point to take in its spectacular view, the most famous in the Galapagos. This view includes Pinnacle Rock, a curiously jutting rock formation that was at least partially formed by US airmen who used it for target practice during World War II. We would then take a trip to the beach shown here on the left. Apart from the ubiquitous sea lions, occasionally we would spot penguins. The Galapagos penguin is the second smallest in the world, and the only one found on the equator. I never got over seeing penguins on tropical islands. We would then hike over to the beach on the other side of the island, where green sea turtles breed and nest during certain times of the year. I once had the opportunity to see hatchlings dig out of their nests and race for the water. Unfortunately, frigate birds got most of them. Other occasional sights included the endemic Dromicus snake and the Galapagos hawk. Here a juvenile hawk dives in to snatch up one of the green sea turtle hatchlings. We would return to the landing site for some snorkeling and sunbathing before returning to the ship.